Dennis Young here, and we got a real special guest, phenomenal music writer, two great books, and all the way across the pond here, Joe Banks. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me, Dennis.
Uh,
It's really great to be here.
Thank you. So before we go into the books, what inspired you to start doing like music writing about music? And
That's a very long story, but I'm a
okay,
relatively late starter to music writing.
okay,
A lot of people who kind of write music biographies, they've come up through the music press, from the early 20s. But I only started actually properly writing in my 40s. I started writing for the Quietus in 2013. So
okay.
I've been doing this for 13 years now. I'd done bits and pieces online before, but I only seriously started in 2013. And at first was just amazed to see my writing online and my name underneath it. But then, you get more ambitious as you go along, get to write for more people. And so I've ended up, writing for quite a few magazines, specifically people like Prog, Mojo, Shindig,
Yeah.
Electronic Sound. But now I'm concentrating more on actually just producing books.
So I wanted to ask you, what drew you to prog and progressive music? I know I love that kind of music.
Yeah, so that's right from kind of when I was a teenager. I guess I had the classic kind of older brother who kind of played lots of music when I was young, so I was hearing people like Yes and Floyd and obviously Hawkwind as well. That's where
Yeah.
all of that comes from. I didn't actually hear Van der Graaf Generator and Peter Hammill until I was about 16, I think, and that was actually through the fact that I got into the what's now called the neo prog scene, Marillion, etc., etc. And Fish out of Marillion was always talking about Peter Hammill. So at some point I thought, great, let's get this, kind of. And the first album I got was God Bluff. So
Oh, I did the same thing. Oh my
I kind of hit
gosh,
gold
that's amazing.
immediately. Yeah, I mean,
So
God
did
Bluff, I
I.
think, yeah,
I was at
still remains my favorite Van der Graaf album.
a store, record store. I was like same thing, 18, and there were cutouts they called it, where they clipped the record and they had a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
imports. And I saw
Mhm.
this record said God Bluff, and I was like just blown away by his voice and the
Yeah.
band and
Yeah, I mean, even having become quite familiar with most of the progressive bands by that point, putting on God Bluff is a completely different experience to
mm,
listening to obviously people like Yes or Genesis. As you say, Hamill's voice is amazing, but the instrumentation, the way that the songs are arranged, they're always kind of on the edge of chaos. I mean, just completely unique.
yeah, I was privileged to speak with David Jackson. I had an
Hmm.
interview with him, and what a great
He's a
guy.
great guy. Yeah,
Ah, really showed all the sax, how he plays, and how he plays the two saxes on this
yeah,
stand. It's really
amazing.
something. So let's talk about Hawkwind. That was Days of the Underground. Is that like your first major book that you put together?
That's right. Yeah, that was. Yeah, yeah. So that came about in. I think I got the contract for that in 2016. I guess, as I said, I'd been writing for various kind of music papers, and I thought that, really, I need to build onto the next level, as it were, and the next level would be a book. And there'd obviously been a few books about Hawkwind come out before then,
Hmm.
but I didn't think that they really kind of captured the big kind of picture around Hawkwind, the big cultural picture as much as the
Yeah.
musical picture. So that's what I really wanted to write about. And I spent years and years and years doing all kinds of projects. Like I used to do screenwriting and things like
Hmm.
that, and I never ever managed to get anybody to kind of greenlight a project before. And I think literally the second person I approached about the Hawkwind book, which is a guy called Mark Pilkington, who runs Stranger Tractor Publishing, he got the email and he said, "Yeah, brilliant, let's do it." Because and he turned out to be a
Hmm.
massive Hawkwind fan. I mean, that's the great thing about Hawkwind is that they have fans in all kinds of places that you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, you
And
wouldn't
and
think
as you
about
know,
that.
much
Yeah.
like Van der Graaf, you don't just have people who are a bit into Hawkwind or a bit into Van der Graaf, they're totally into it. So as soon as Mark got my general email saying I wanted to do like a cultural biography of Hawkwind, if you like, he said, "Yeah, brilliant, let's do it." And then I took about about 2.5 years to write it, because I had no idea at that point how long it was going to be, what
Yeah.
form it was going to take. Hadn't done a book before, so it's quite an unusual format. But they were incredibly supportive.
Oh,
I
they
couldn't have really
helped you
gone
out
with
with that
anybody better. Oh yeah, I
interviews.
mean, a normal publisher would just not have put up with the way I was doing things, because
Mm.
as you've probably seen in the book,
Yeah.
it's,
Yes.
you've got biography, but you've got album pieces, you've got essays, you've got interviews, so it's trying to give more of a three-dimensional view of the band rather than the usual straight rock biog thing, which, Hawkwind, as I said, had already had a couple of very decent ones of those beforehand, but I wanted to do something different.
You give such an in-depth picture of the band. It's really phenomenal, what you've done with that.
Thank you.
And what Hawkwind record would you recommend for viewers out there that never heard the music or
I
want to
think,
be?
I think there's a number of entry points for Hawkwind. I mean, their early stuff is I mean, it's kind of quite dense. It's quite repetitive. It's kind of quite dark. It's, in a way, in the early 70s, they're like a one man or one band krautrock movement in the UK. I mean, Britain did not have any other bands like that at all.
Okay.
So while that's, for me, where some of their amazing stuff is, I'm not sure if it's, for somebody who's never heard Hawkwind before, I'm not sure if that's the right place to start, because it can be, quite
Yeah.
heavy. So I would say, I mean, the first album I ever heard, and again, this is my big brother had it, was Warrior on the Edge of Time from 1975, which is probably also their most progressive album, because it's full of mellotron and synth and
Mm.
violin and, and flute and sax. It's a really, the palette is really, sound palette is really wide on that album, but just incredible songs. It's kind of like a concept album based on, Michael Moorcock's Eternal
Yeah.
Champion book. So that was quite appealing. So if all of that sounds kind of cool, if you're into like that fantasy prog kind of thing, then that's definitely the place to start. But the other place I would also recommend is when Robert Calvert has kind of taken the band over in the later half of the 70s. And Robert Calvert has kind of been there from the start, but it's only from 1976 onwards that he becomes their proper front man. And he's an amazing kind of poet and singer and a real visionary, in a way similar to kind of Peter Hammill. And in 1977, they bring out an album called Quark, Strangeness and Charm, which I think of all of those albums is probably, it's the most accessible, it's the cleverest, it's got kind of loads of really cool songs, as Hawkwind is a science fiction band, but also, a science fiction used as a kind of vehicle for satire and social comment, rather than just, aliens and rockets to the moon or whatever. So that's a great album as well.
They've got so many great album covers too. I mean, it's just,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. So
that adds to the whole mystique of the band.
yeah, so in the early 70s, particularly, or they worked with a guy called Barney Bubbles, not his real name,
Okay.
but he produced like a series of amazing album covers for them, really innovative as well, in the way that they were designed, and they would fold out and be die cut. And their manager at the time, Doug Smith, said to me that Hawkwind's music wouldn't have sounded the same with anybody else's covers. So it was literally that whole idea that you got the record, you stared at the cover, you read all of the stuff on the cover, and that, I mean, that's the same with a lot of prog bands. I mean, something like Roger Dean and Yes as well. But, kind of Barney Bubbles, invents the Hawkwind visual universe, if you like. And that's another one of the things that really appealed to me about them.
Well, I have to put Genesis in there too. Paul Whitehead,
Or
he did
Whitehead,
an
who, of
amazing
course,
job.
worked with Van de Graaff as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right. He did really great work on those
Mm.
records. So the book is still available, right? You could still buy it, right?
What, Days of the
Yeah.
Underground? Days of the Underground is still available, but you have to go to the Stranger Tractor website now. If you go onto Amazon, it's sold out. It's sold out pretty much everywhere else online, but Stranger Tractor have still got a few in their warehouse. So it's going to sell out very, very quickly. So if you haven't got one yet, go to the Stranger Tractor website and you should be able to find it there. Or in fact, you can go to the website, the book's website, which is just daysoftheunderground.com. And there's links to buy it there. And it's sold something like 7,500 copies. So I'm incredibly, so pleased with that. But it means that once the final few copies have gone, that's probably going to be it for the foreseeable future.
Like a collector's item there, you know, with the.
There's also, sorry, if I could just add, there's
Mm.
also a companion piece to the book, which
Oh,
when we first put the book out in 2020, there was a special edition, and it came with an extra book of kind of interviews, so all of the
okay.
various transcripts, because I actually couldn't actually use most of them in the main
Yeah.
book. And was it last year or was it the year before, we basically expanded that, so it's got even more interviews in it, and that's now available as a standalone book as well. And you can also get that from the Strange Attractor and Days of the Underground website. And yeah, I think that's also kind of really worth a read. It like interviews. I mean, it's got 36 interviews with various Hawkwind
Mm.
people and all the people around them as well. It's
I got
called
to pick that up.
Sideways Through Time.
Okay, I got to pick that up. That's really should be really good to hear their
I think you really
input.
love it. Yeah, it's great.
So let's move on, and this is really an incredible book. I
Thank you.
mean, it's got everything imaginable about Peter Hammill and Von de Graaff Generator, and what an amazing band. And Peter is, I think, one of the most underrated singers in music history and
I think
writers.
so. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. He is. He's certainly kind of absolutely key figure in the development of progressive rock from the late '60s onwards. But the way that he, kind of runs with it and kind of moves into lots of. I mean, I was going to say moves into lots of different genres. I mean, he's another guy, a bit like Hawkwind, who kind of invents his own genre. There's no other kind of albums sound quite like Van de Graaff
No,
albums or sound like
right.
Peter Hamill's solo albums. He's a genuinely kind of unique figure within rock music. And after all of this time, I mean, he's still a cult figure. He never
He
ever
is.
has really broken through to the mainstream. But again, people who know about him are absolutely, completely dedicated to his vision and his music.
It's always fun. I mean, I went to a Von de Graaff Generator show, the three-piece version, I think about 8 or 9 years ago, and it's so
Right.
great to see fans there like myself,
I,
because
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that even though they only at the time in the 1970s in their heyday, they played that one show in America at the New York Beacon Theatre.
right,
You know
right.
about the
I
Beacon
remember
Theatre
that.
show, which you can now go online. So Jim Christopoulos, who Christopoulos, sorry, I
Oh
always get
yeah,
the
he's
guy's name
amazing
wrong,
too.
who did the original Van de Graaff book with Phil Smart. So he has put together. It's literally a documentary on YouTube about that show,
Mm.
which stitches together existing footage, syncs it amazingly with the recording of that show, and then has lots of recollections from fans. And it's an absolutely brilliant piece of work. So anybody who hasn't seen that, go on YouTube and look up Van de Graaff Beacon Theatre, because it's absolutely brilliant. But as I say, that was at the time the only show they played in America. So it's amazing that they still retained like an American fan base.
Well, Peter could sing so soft and beautiful, and then just Narnia Your Last Chance, he can be aggressive and in your face. It's really
Hmm.
something.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So how long did it take you to write this book? I mean, it's so incredibly
um,
pictures and
Yeah, I
stories.
mean, again, it took about 2 years, but that actually it felt a lot shorter than the Hawkwind book, because this time around I had a bit more idea of what I was doing from the start, and I had a structure. And to a certain extent, it's like you start at the start, which is it starts
Yeah.
with his school days, but of course it's then you quickly get into Van de Graaff and the first Van de Graaff album, The Aerosol Grey Machine, and then go from there. And I always wanted the same as the Hawkwind book. It concentrates just on the 1970s. I mean, both books end in 1980 in
Right.
terms of the really in-depth analysis of the music. So for Van de Graaff and Hammill, that's a black box which comes out in 1980. But I also do a big kind of chapter at the end, which kind of then looks at everything he's done since then. So that's a bit different from the Horton book. But yeah, so it took a couple of years to do, but yeah, it didn't feel that long actually, and I think that actually probably included a lot of collecting of visual material as well, because for both the Hawkwind book and this book, that's totally totally also down to me. That's I love almost doing that as much as the writing, kind of finding these images and and kind of tracking down pictures that people haven't seen before. That's really fun.
Did you get a chance to talk to the members of the band? Anybody about the?
Yeah, no, I had a very big interview with David Jackson. I didn't speak to Peter, but I did end up having quite a big email dialogue with him. So he answered a lot of very, very obscure questions, or he
No.
tried to anyway. And he did a certain amount of fact checking for me, which was great. I didn't get to speak to Hugh or Guy, unfortunately. Guy, I think was basically very, very politely, because I mean, when you're doing these things, people don't know who the hell I am. They don't know me from Adam, but he very politely said that he would pass, and I don't think Hugh ever got back to me. But I spoke to kind of a lot of other people as well, and perhaps the one person I spoke to that I was most blown away by was Alice, who is Peter's partner
Oh,
from
okay.
1968 through to 75, and is the source and is his muse to a certain extent during that
Mm.
period, and is the source of many of his lyrics. And obviously the Over album from 1977 is literally about their breakup of their relationship, and she had never ever spoken on record before, so it was amazing to speak to her. And she was a brilliant, kind of funny, clever woman. Really fantastic to speak to her.
For her to be around during that period must have been amazing. I mean, phenomenal. I was really intrigued by the bus tour with Genesis and what was it, Linda? Well, that must have been,
Linda's fun, yeah.
yeah, didn't think, yeah.
Yes. So that was funny because that was a Tony Stratton Smith idea. So Tony Stratton Smith is the legendary founder of Charisma Records, and Van der Graaf were one of the first bands on Charisma, and Tony also managed them as well, which kind of created a bit of problems later on. But one of his ideas was, I think it was became known as the Six Bob Tour, which basically meant it was a 30 pence, which would have been, I don't know, kind of how much is that? Probably 50 cents in America,
Mm,
whereby you could, 1971 this was, you could go and see three bands. And the idea was that they all had their followings at the time.
mm.
By putting them together, it meant that they could play the big concert halls rather than just the college circuit, which they were kind of all on at the time. And, and kept the ticket price that low. And it was amazingly successful. And it was a real platform for all three of those bands to kind of go further, if you like.
Yeah.
Although obviously it was Genesis who ultimately went the furthest
Mm.
with that.
Yeah, that must have been something to see. I mean,
Mm.
can you imagine that kind of bill and being in the crowd for that?
And the funny thing is, I mean, at the time, so Genesis were the junior partner of that. So Van der Graaf actually headlined most nights. Genesis usually opened, and then Lindisfarne were in the middle, although there were a few dates at Lindisfarne headline because they were a band from the northeast of England and they had an incredible following there. So when they got to Newcastle, for instance, they were definitely headlining. But yeah, it was funny that for the most part it was Genesis who were opening. But as I say, they were the ones who stuck at it and ultimately reaped the biggest rewards.
Yeah, that's something. Now, I wanted to show this too. I don't know if anybody has this. I have the Peter Hammill 2020 disc uh, release, a box set, and then I also have the Vonnegut one in the
Yeah.
back. If any
Mm.
fans out there, I mean, if you're really want to dig deep into the story, also with your book is like a companion to this
Well, I
whole.
mean, that's the idea, and it's been nice to hear that that's what some people have actually
It
done with
is.
it. They've literally been, as they've been reading through the album pieces, they've been listening to the record, because it's nice when people say, "Oh, okay, I hadn't thought about the record or in that way, or that's something I hadn't heard before," and so I'm trying to kind of open the music up a bit more, or just provide some new angles on it for people, and I think people have really liked that aspect of it.
Now I won't hear Von de Graaff for a while, and then I come back to it, and it's always fresh. It's
Hmm.
always sounds like it never ages. That
I
music and
think
Peters too.
Yeah, I mean, particularly on the Van der Graaf, the Charisma Years box set, the stereo remixes by Stephen Taylor are incredible as another way of kind of opening up the music and providing a new perspective on it. I think his mixes are just kind of brilliant. I think it's H2E, H2HE, Porn Hearts, God Bluff, and Still Life, and then he does Future Now and PH7 on the Peter Hamill box
Right,
set, and
right. I
that's
know. I got.
fantastic to have
Yeah,
that angle on it as well.
yeah. I mean, that makes a big difference to get a different view of
Hmm.
how this
Hmm.
sounds. You hear all these little things that you miss, that you don't
Hmm.
hear on the record. So I
Hmm.
dived in after God Bluff, and I searched for every Peter Hamill and every Van de Graaf record I had to have. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Like I say, it's people don't usually just kind of casually get into them. I mean, once you got hooked,
yeah,
then you want to kind of hear the whole thing. And I think both of those box sets are amazing kind of collections of music. I mean, arguably it's where the real meat of their discography is. But both Hamill and Van der Graaf have continued now making music to the present day, and
isn't that
there's
something, man?
amazing music there as well.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't stop, and I don't know if they're going to be playing any more shows in the future, but what a career, right? Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, Peter is playing some solo shows in Poland and Italy later this year. That was just announced like earlier this week, I think. And I don't know whether we're going to see Van der Graaf on stage again, but never say never. You just don't know.
Has Peter said anything about the book? Like, I know you got an email, but has he said anything?
Um, he he said that in the nicest possible way, he wasn't intending to read it
Okay,
because and that was why at the very start of the process, my publisher Kingmaker, they actually had a kind of mutual acquaintance friend, if you like, who approached Peter and saying, "Okay, we're going to do this big biography on you. Would you like to, do a big sit down interview?" And he said no.
huh.
But that was basically because he very much feels that he's an artist still in motion, in progress. And
Mm.
I think he views the whole biography thing as a kind of, it's the full stop at the end of the line,
Right,
which
right,
he's
right.
kind of resisting to a certain extent. But as I said, when we actually got in contact through email, it was incredibly helpful and very nice. So so that was kind of interesting. But uh, uh, I was going to say something else then, but I forgot what it was. Sorry.
That's okay,
Carry
no
on.
problem. Now, what you can get this book pretty readily, right? I got it.
Well, I'm glad you've
Amazon.
mentioned that because this book actually sold out in 4 months. So for the last 2 months or so, it's not been available. But
Wow.
literally, we've just printed another 1,000 copies, which is going to be it once they're gone. But they are literally going into the warehouse as I speak. So it's already available again for pre-order from Burning Shed in the UK
Okay.
and the Bandwagon USA in America. You can
Okay.
pre-order it there now. Please do pre-order it if you haven't already got a copy, and then that should actually be going out in the next few days. And it will then start appearing again on places like Amazon and
Okay.
kind of the various kind of book retailers online. So
I'm glad
yes,
I
it will
got
be on.
I'm glad I got my copy when I did. You know,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, there was a little bit of umming and ahhing, but I kind of thought that you can't do a book within 4 months. It's not available again, because I'd like it to be on catalog for a bit
yeah,
longer
yeah.
than that. So we've done another 1,000 copies.
I love the way you put the photos in with the time period and talk about the songs. It's such an in-depth book. I mean, it's
Yeah,
really
I mean,
great.
I'm slightly, as you can probably tell, a little, kind of obsessive about that kind of detail and getting everything in the
That's
right order
great.
and getting it as factually correct as possible. I'm sure there must be things in there which, you know, I mean, that was the question you asked me about whether Peter had actually spoken to me about the book. As far as I know, he has a copy. I don't know. I don't know if he's done anything more than just flick through it. But I may actually be speaking to him in the next few days for a feature for Prog magazine. At which
Oh,
point
okay.
I will obviously politely ask whether he's had a chance to look at any of it. Because as I said, inevitably there'll be some things in there which are probably not correct, because it's
Right.
impossible to get every tiny detail correct. He may have differences of opinion as to how I've kind of perceived certain songs, and I think he probably agreed that's fine, because everybody has their own interpretations of things.
Of
But
course.
I'm hoping I haven't made too many factual errors, but maybe I'm going to find out about
Now
that.
you've done other interviews, right, for the magazine and different online um, places.
What for Peter,
Oh no, for
or just in
other
general?
artists, other
Oh yes,
artists.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I so for Prog magazine, it actually has been mostly based around. I've done a lot of Hawkwind features for them, but for instance, they've just asked me to speak to Arthur Brown about his kind of upcoming
Oh yeah,
album.
he's
So
something.
so he's an amazing guy. I actually have spoken to him before, and to say he's in his mid-80s now. He's incredibly eloquent still, and totally on top of things. So he's an amazing character. But if people go to the Days of the Underground.com website, there's a
Right,
tab on there which is called Further Reading,
right.
and if you hit that, one of the drop downs is Other Writing, and that's got all of my other major music writing in there, where I've kind of talked to kind of artists, or kind of done big pieces on their albums, and it's got everything in there from I kind of trying a lot of King Crimson in there, for instance, but it goes up to people like uh, talking about Husker Du and Slint. There's actually quite a
Mm,
bit of American stuff in there, and so if anybody likes what they read
yeah,
in the Hammill book, and wants to kind of read more of the same, then please do check that out. And
great.
check out that. I mean, so that's the Days of the Underground website for Hawkwind, but there's also a website for the Hammill book, which is rock and roll,
Okay,
ROLE
okay,
.net, and that also has loads of extra material which didn't go into the book, and
okay.
I'm still writing for that, so there's going to be more material going in there. So please do, if you read the book, please do go to those websites, because there's hours and hours and hours and hours of entertainment on all of those sites.
There's a lot of work you put into this. I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Um, I think I'm probably just a bit obsessive about it. Kind of. I just want to give as full a picture as possible. If I but without kind of boring on unnecessarily. Hopefully, everything in there is interesting.
What artist was any challenging artist that was difficult to interview, or you had a tough time getting the
Um,
interview?
uh,
Putting you on the
let me.
spot here.
Yeah, no, I don't think necessarily. I mean, I think most people I've spoken to have been pretty good. I remember having an interview with Jello Biafra for the Hawkwind book, which he had insisted at conducting for me at like 3 in the morning UK
Oh,
time,
that's, oh my
which
gosh.
was that was, and he was a little spiky on that sometimes, but that was because I was probably like half asleep when I was conducting the interview. But he was still a good guy, and he provided some amazing quotes for the book. So yeah, so mostly, kind of people are kind of happy to talk. I think as long as you're asking reasonably intelligent questions. It is difficult speaking to. I mean, a lot of the people that I speak to have been in the business for decades, and there's not many questions they haven't already heard.
Right,
So,
right. That's
for
true.
me, I'm trying to kind of get something new out of them, but I'm also trying to hopefully ask them some questions they haven't completely heard before, to kind of, so it keeps it entertaining for them. So hopefully if I speak to Peter, I'll think of a few things to ask
Yeah.
him that I haven't asked already in the emails, and just to keep it kind of interesting. I mean, because people often do kind of fall back as well on the same answers, because they've got into a kind of pattern of saying certain things. But it's nice if you can just get a little bit of new information or a new anecdote out of them. So that's always what I try to do.
I always try to get the interviews with the people that work with the big stars because you get so many stories.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Rather than speaking to the people themselves, the people, the managers, or the roadies, or any kind of support crew, often have quite a different view
Yeah.
on the kind of usual narrative. So yeah, it's always brilliant to speak to them, which is why, as I said, it was amazing to speak to Alice, and to get her kind of view of what it had been like, being with Peter in those kind of early years, and that was fantastic.
Did you get to speak with Tim Blake at all?
For Hawkwind, I didn't actually know. He was one of those people who kind of never kind of got it together basically
Yeah,
to speak to him. But as I say, in that Sideways Through Time, the interviews book, it's got a lot of members of Hawkwind, during the 70s, but lots of the managers, friends and relations, all kinds of support people there. There's like, Michael Butterworth, who wrote the two Hawklords novels, the books
right,
that were
right.
written about Hawk, the Time of the Hawklords and Queens of Deliria, which are wild books. So, but also people like Liquid Len I spoke to, the Light Sky, and yeah, so it gives a real kind of multifaceted view of the band, I think.
I did speak to Tim Blake in an interview, and he was really
Okay.
funny. At the end, he goes, "Did you get what you wanted?" That was his last statement. It was
I know he should have
hysterical.
said, "No, Tim, let's go on for another hour." Yeah.
Well, I had a two-part interview with him. I was very lucky, but that was the
Yeah.
funniest thing. The last thing he said. I mean, it was great. It was absolutely great. So,
Yeah.
what are you currently working on? Another book by another artist, or
Um, what I'm currently doing is I'm started working with a record label, an American-based record label called Think Like a Key. I don't know if you've heard
never
of
heard
these
of them?
guys.
No.
They're a kind of boutique reissue label. They specialize in
Oh,
kind of short-run CD stuff, and they check out their website because they've put out a load
okay.
of really amazing reissues of kind of old progressive psychedelic stuff. And the guy who runs it, Roger Hudai,
Right.
um, he has a real attention to detail as well. The packaging is brilliant. And anyway, he approached me to do sleeve notes for a reissue they were doing of the Michael Moorcock album and the Deep Fix, The New World's Fair. And he approached me to do some sleeve notes for them of that, which I did. And I also worked with him on getting. So during the process of doing the interviews for the Hammill book, I'd spoken to
Yeah.
Judge Smith, who I believe that
Oh,
you've
okay. Yeah, I
spoken.
spoke to. Yes.
He's a fantastic guy, and I had found out ahead of speaking to him that he had done a rock musical in the mid 70s called the Kibbo Kift, which I won't go into the full story here, but it was like it was originally started off as a concept album, but it turned into a musical that they actually performed in Edinburgh and Sheffield in the mid 70s. And the Kibbo Kift were this breakaway movement from the Boy Scouts in 1920s Britain. They were non-militaristic, but they were, they were like an original kind of nature cult, if you like. But then they turned into this kind of quite radical political party. And anyway, so he had done a whole musical about them, but it had never been released. And I knew that there were tapes existing of the songs. He demoed the songs. But I got to hear them and I thought, wow, this stuff's amazing. Why has he never released it? And anyway, so I did the interview and then I said, why have you never put
Yeah.
out the Kibbo Kift? And he was like, oh, it's a long time ago. And I said to him, I'm gonna get this released for you because I love this and I think it should be out there. And he probably thought, yeah, okay, fair enough. But anyway, that's also
Hmm.
something that I did then with Roger at Think Like a Key. Roger really liked it as well, and so we put that together, and that came out just in May actually, so kind of
Oh, I
about
got to
6
look
weeks
into
ago.
that. Wow.
That is obviously as with all things, you can kind of listen to it online if you like first. But I think it's a tremendous, tremendous album. It's not like Van der Graaf, but it's like a kind of pastoral, psychedelic prog pop type thing.
Hmm.
And it's a completely sung through musical, and the songs are great. It's not at all like an Andrew Lloyd Webber thing or anything like that. It's really absolutely super. So anyway, so I did those two projects with Roger, and then because we had worked together so well, I said, maybe I could do some other stuff with you and actually recommend maybe some
Right.
albums for the re-release. So that's basically what I'm doing with him now. So we've just done the first of those next projects, as it were, and that's going to be released in November. And that is for a band. Here, you've got an exclusive here. I don't think I've really talked about this before.
Okay.
So that's a band called Automatic Fine Tuning, who released
Interesting.
one album in 1976 for Charisma. Um, the band, as Automatic Fine Tuning, or AFT as they were known, they existed for less than a year.
Hmm.
They had been together for a long time before that, but as AFT they only existed for a year, and they did this one album for Charisma, came out at the end of '76, which is a completely unique piece of work. It's how to describe it. It's basically an instrumental album. It's guitar based. It's a progressive guitar based album. There's no keyboards on it. But what it actually sounds like is it sounds like something from the future. You won't believe that this came out in 1976. It's absolutely brilliant. And sorry, I've gone into full on PR mode now, but
Oh,
that's
wow.
coming out in November, and I've done the sleeve notes for that, and that was a brilliant exercise as well, because everybody actually thought that all of the guys in the band were dead, but I managed to find out that
Yeah,
the
yeah.
drummer was still very much alive, and I tracked him down and spoke to him, and he was a great guy, and spoke to a few other people around there, and so the full story of AFT, which has never ever been
Mm.
told before, comes with the album, and the album. Roger works with a guy called Prof Stoned. I don't know
Okay.
if you've heard of Prof
No.
Stoned.
No.
If you look him up online,
Okay.
he is this. He's an old. It's obviously a pseudonym. He's an old '70s recording engineer,
Okay.
and for, basically for fun now, what he does is he goes back and remasters like old, I don't know, mono issues of Rolling Stones albums, and he makes them available on his website, which is just,
Okay.
I think, profstone.com for free. And so he's also works with Think Like a Key as their kind of in-house remastering guy. And honestly, the remastering job he has done on the AFT album, and that he did for the Kibbo Kift and the New World's Fair, is phenomenal.
I got to hear
Absolutely
those.
amazing. So I think you'll really like them. So anyway, so the AFT album's coming out in November, but we've got hopefully two or three other things lined up for the next year as well that are going to happen too.
It's
So
great.
so that's one of the things I'm
Okay.
doing. I am thinking at the moment about potential other book projects. There may be possibly an Amondul 2 project happening
Oh, they were great.
with Stranger Tractor again. So Mark at Stranger Tractor is also a massive Amondul 2 fan. So what
Okay.
that and that's going to be a slightly different. It's not going to be. I will write for that, but I'm kind of project managing it at the moment, because the bulk of that book, if it happens, will actually be a translation of a German book. So we're
Okay.
trying to see if we can make that happen at the
Yeah.
moment. So yeah, so that's one of the book things I've got potentially on the go.
You're keeping the 70s music alive. I mean, some of the music that
Yeah.
nobody's heard, or it's such a
Well,
magical period, you know?
I think so, and I think that I think that all of this out of the music, hopefully most of it that I write about, it absolutely still deserves to be heard today. It's not just a nostalgia trip by any means, or it's not a nostalgia trip, and it's not that kind of let's milk the back catalogue until it squeaks. It's genuinely wanting to kind of put exciting music in front of people that they've never heard before, and you know, whether that's in a book form or actually, you know, kind of helping now to kind of reissue the music as well.
You'd think how young these guys were back then doing this amazing music, right? 21, 22, it's
Yeah,
just
I mean that is
20.
that really is the thing. We just take it for granted
Yeah.
exactly how young they were. Like, you know, Van der Graaf doing Porn Hearts when they're all in their early 20s.
Isn't that
I mean,
something?
you know, kind of a piece of music, an album like that, the complexity of it and the ambition of it. But in those days, it just felt like, you know, kind of people had that kind of. I'm not saying that people aren't ambitious these days, but particularly when you think of the tools they had to hand at the time, you know, how difficult it was to make something as complex as Porn Hearts, and to pull it off. It's just an incredible achievement.
Well, it was in the air, you know, when one band was doing something great, then, they wanted to follow up. I read
Mm-hmm.
where John Anderson saw the original King Crimson, him and Chris Squire, and said, we've got to get to work,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
those were yeah, it's like, and I think Crimson particularly were the touch paper, as it were, for that whole progressive, not actually just the progressive, movement. I mean, I know people like Pete Townsend from the Who was completely, and the Beatles as well. They were
Yeah.
completely blown away by what Crimson were doing, and
Yeah.
very much thought this is it. This is the next stage of rock music.
A shame there's not many live videos though of the band. There was something like cat food I saw on a show, and but as far as a little clip from Hyde Park, but I
Yeah.
don't. There's just nothing out there. You can't
I
find it.
think I think of the original lineup. That's exactly it. I think
Yeah,
there's from about the Locks Tongue period onwards. They appeared on some European
right.
shows, and so there's some nice coverage there. But even like you say, live shows, no, not at all. I mean that cat food footage is actually from Top of the Pops.
Oh, okay.
Which it's funny because I actually went to a King Crimson listening party
Mm,
this weekend for in the wake of Poseidon, and Peter Giles was the special guest there, and so there was a lot of talk about this piece of footage because it only emerged, I think, online a few years ago.
right, right. I remember that.
Nobody thought this existed anymore, and it was because what Top of the Pops, which is obviously a British program, what they used to do is they'd film the program, but then they'd send it around Europe to all of the different pop shows, and they would insert their own links. So
Okay.
everybody was like, at first, what's this weird German show that King Crimson are on? But it was just Top of the Pops, but with a German link inserted ahead of it. And it's a very funny link as well. But yeah, that footage of them playing on Top of the Pops is just magnificent.
It is. I mean, and then Robert Fripp played on those early Von de Graaf records.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they were the first band that he guested with, and I think he and Hammill, I mean, obviously then worked together on his first solo album,
Right. I love that record, that
which is
exposure.
also as an exposure, an amazing album. And obviously when Robert's in New York, and it's it's that real got that real vibe to it. So I think they're quite similar characters. They both massively value their independence,
Mm.
being uncompromising to their
Right,
vision.
right.
That whole thing is kind of very, very similar for both of them. Yeah.
We were very lucky to be a part of this whole music that came out, and you're really exploring it and you're making it available to people like myself to really dive deep into these artists that we love. Peter Hammill, King Crimson, Von de Graaf. Well, thank you for doing this. It's been
No, no, not
phenomenal.
at all. I mean, thank you for any. I mean, yeah, it's lovely always to hear any kind of feedback that people have, got something from it. Because I mean, that's why I write. I'm trying to, as I say, get people interested and excited again. In a lot of these fans, as you
Yeah.
say, they've been fans for decades as well.
Yep.
But to try and bring something new to the table.
And there's always new generations of people listening now to this music.
Yeah. Yeah, I
That's
mean,
what's great.
the whole thing at the moment of the YouTube reaction videos where some 20-year-olds are hearing "In the Court of the Crimson King"
Yeah.
for the first time, or 21st Century Schizo Man, or then are hearing kind of in a Plague of Lighthouse Keepers, and you can't
Yeah.
believe that this music exists.
Yes, that's true. I mean all that whole era of music was incredible. So
Yeah.
could you put just I want to add to the description all these links that you talked about, where to get the book
Hmm.
and everything else, what you're doing with the label. So if you could get that to me also, I'll put it in the description.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll completely send that to you. Thank you, Dennis.
Joe, it's been a privilege and pleasure to talk to you. Hope it cools off there in London.
Yeah. Sorry about all the mopping of the
Oh
brow.
my
It really
gosh.
is
Heat
super
wave,
hot
huh?
here at the
Oh my
moment. I'm not
gosh.
usually this sweaty.
I don't ever hear about it, UK getting that warm, but just
Well, yeah,
crazy
I mean
weather these
it's even
days.
hotter in France and Spain at the moment. It's a killer. It really is a killer, unfortunately.
Well, hopefully it cools off and you keep writing and doing some great work. So,
Thanks very
Joe,
much, Dennis.
thank you for doing this and
Thank
have
you.
a great night there in the UK.